My brother called me a burden at my father's bedside. In front of my father. Out loud. No hesitation. What he didn't know was that 4 hours earlier, my father had already sat across from his estate attorney and changed everything. And what my brother didn't know, what nobody in that hospital room knew except me, was that the sealed envelope was already in my coat pocket. Had been since that morning. My father's handwriting on the front. My name. I didn't say a word when Marcus called me a burden. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. I just sat down, took my father's hand, and waited. Because the will had already been signed. And I already knew what was in it. Before I tell you what happened when Marcus found out, please hit like, subscribe, and drop your city and local time below. I want to know where in the world you're hearing this right now. I need to take you back to understand how we got to that hospital room. Not just to that Tuesday, but further, to the kind of family we were, and the kind of children Marcus and I had each decided to become. My father's name is Gerald Harmon. He is 72 years old. He was a civil engineer for 31 years, the kind of man who measured twice before he cut anything, who kept a level in his truck at all times, who believed that most problems in the world came from people who hadn't thought things through carefully enough. He is precise without being cold. Quiet without being distant. He doesn't say much, but when he does, he means it. My mother died when I was 19. Cancer. It was faster than anyone had prepared for, which is the particular cruelty of fast illnesses. She was here and then she was not, and my father raised the two of us from that point forward alone, in the same house in central Ohio where Marcus and I had grown up. Marcus is 5 years older than me. He was the firstborn, named after our grandfather on my father's side, a fact that had always felt like a kind of appointment. Not a title anyone gave him officially. Just something that settled over him early and that he wore without question. He is smart, I want to be clear about that. He is genuinely intelligent and capable, and when he is at his best, he can be charming in a way that makes you want to tell him things. But Marcus has always understood his position in a room the way some people understand weather. Instinctively. Constantly. And he has always acted accordingly. I am the younger one. The quieter one. The one who stayed. That last part matters. It matters more than I understood for a long time. After my mother died, my father kept going. That's the word I always come back to, kept. He didn't flourish exactly, not at first. But he kept. He drove us to school, he made dinner most nights, he showed up for everything he was supposed to show up for. He grieved in the way I imagine he did everything else, deliberately, privately, without making it someone else's problem. Marcus left for college the following year. He went to school in Pennsylvania, then stayed on the East Coast after graduation. He built a life there, a career in financial consulting, a nice apartment in a city where he knew the right people, the kind of life that photographs well. He came back to Ohio twice a year. Thanksgiving and usually a birthday if the timing worked out. I went to school closer to home. I came back. Not because I couldn't leave, I want to be clear about that too. I came back because there was something here I wasn't ready to leave. My father was one of those things. The house I grew up in was another. There is a particular kind of comfort in knowing a place so well that you stop seeing it, and I had that here. I had built a life in this city, a job I was good at, a small apartment I liked, a handful of people I trusted. It wasn't a dramatic life. But it was mine, and I was satisfied with it. What I am trying to tell you is that no one asked me to stay close to my father. No one assigned it to me. I just did. Because he was there and I was there, and it seemed like the obvious thing. My father's health began to change when I was 34. The first sign was his heart, a small irregularity caught at a routine physical, the kind of thing that requires monitoring rather than immediate intervention, the kind of thing that sounds manageable until it becomes less so. He was 66 at the time. He took the news in his usual way, which is to say he nodded, asked the doctor to explain the mechanism, and went home and adjusted his diet. The Parkinson's diagnosis came 2 years later. He called me on a Wednesday evening, just after 7. He told me plainly, the way he told me everything, and then he said, "I wanted you to hear it from me before I called Marcus." I drove over that night. We sat at his kitchen table, and I watched him explain what the neurologist had said, with the same patience he had once used to explain algebra to me, and I thought, this man has always been the most dignified person I know. I adjusted my life. Not dramatically, not all at once. But steadily, the way water moves, I moved closer to home. I restructured my schedule. I learned the medications and the appointments and the particular ways his condition changed him on difficult days versus easier ones. I drove him to his Tuesday morning appointments at the neurology clinic. I stocked his kitchen with the things he could manage. I knew his cardiologist's name and his neurologist's name and the name of the receptionist at the pharmacy where he picked up his prescriptions. Marcus called more frequently after the diagnosis. I noticed that. He asked questions, careful, practical questions, the kind a person asks when they are trying to understand the scope of something. He came back to Ohio 3 times that year instead of 2. I noticed that too. There is a particular kind of attention that disguises itself as concern. I have learned to recognize it. It usually starts with questions that sound reasonable. My brother was good at reasonable questions. The first ones came early, not long after my father's Parkinson's diagnosis. We were all together at Thanksgiving, the 3 of us at the dining room table in my father's house, the same table we had eaten at our whole lives, and Marcus asked my father, almost casually, if he had given any thought to his arrangements. My father looked up from his plate. Marcus clarified, finances, the house, what happens if things progress. Just being practical, he said. You want to make sure everything's in order. My father said he had things in order. Marcus asked if he had spoken with an attorney recently. My father said he had. The conversation moved on. I kept my face neutral. I looked at my father's face, not my brother's. Gerald Harmon's expression had not changed, exactly, but something in his eyes had gone a little cooler, the way a room goes slightly cooler when a window opens somewhere you can't see. He had noticed. That Christmas, after dinner, I was in the kitchen washing dishes. Through the doorway, I watched Marcus sit down next to my father in the living room. They talked for almost 20 minutes. My father listened more than he spoke, which was not unusual for him, but when he came back to the kitchen for his evening medication, he looked tired in a way that wasn't physical. I handed him his glass of water. I didn't ask. Your brother worries, he said. I said yes. I thought, that's one word for it. Over the following year, Marcus's visits became more regular. Each one felt like reconnaissance, though if you had pressed me to prove it I couldn't have. He never said anything directly inappropriate. He was careful about that. He talked to my father about the housing market, about interest rates, about how property values in this part of Ohio had appreciated significantly. He mentioned once that a friend of his in real estate had called the neighborhood undervalued for what it is. My father's house is not grand. It is a 4-bedroom colonial on a tree-lined street, paid off years ago, the house my parents bought together the year before Marcus was born. It is the place where my mother made Sunday dinners and my father built a workbench in the garage, and I sat on the back porch through every season of my childhood. It is worth, in purely financial terms, somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000, depending on the market. Marcus understood this perfectly. One afternoon, when Marcus had gone to pick up lunch and my father and I were alone in the living room, my father said something I have thought about many times since. He said, I've been watching him. I looked at him. I've been watching him for a while now. He didn't say anything else. He picked up the book he'd been reading. I stayed quiet, which is what you do when someone who measures twice before they cut anything has just told you something. The most explicit moment came about 8 months before the hospital scene. Marcus had driven in for a weekend visit. He and I had managed, as we usually did, to be cordial in a functional way. We moved around each other like 2 people who share a kitchen without sharing a language. On Sunday afternoon, while my father was resting, Marcus found me on the back porch. He sat down without being asked. You know this situation isn't sustainable, he said. Which situation? You. Here. Managing Dad's whole life. I looked at the yard. My father had planted a stand of oak trees along the back fence 20 years ago. They were tall now. I'm not managing his life, I said. I'm spending time with him. Claire. Asterisk, he said my name the way people say it when they want to end a conversation before it has started. Asterisk, you've structured your entire life around someone else's decline. That's not healthy for you or for him. I turned to look at him. He had the expression he always had when he was sure he was the adult in the room. I said, "Is there something specific you want to say to me, Marcus?" He shifted in his chair. There was a pause. Then, "I just think we should talk about what the plan looks like long term. For Dad. For the house. For all of it." I stood up. "Then talk to Dad," I said. I went inside. What I didn't say, and what I have thought about since, is that I already knew my father had an attorney. I already knew his name was Daniel Marsh. And I had already understood, from 2 years of watching my brother's pattern, that whatever conversation Marcus was trying to have with me was the same one he had already been trying to have with Gerald Harmon, and that my father had been declining to have it, quietly and consistently, for longer than Marcus realized. Stay with me. Because what happened next is the part that changes everything, and it started not with a confrontation, but with a Tuesday morning appointment and a sealed envelope. 3 days before the hospital, my father called me on a Tuesday evening. I remember exactly where I was at my kitchen table, eating dinner, half watching something on my laptop. His number came up and I answered, and before I could say anything he said, "I need you to take me somewhere tomorrow morning. Early. Can you come at 8:30? I said yes. I didn't ask where. I arrived at 8:25. He was already dressed, properly dressed, not just his around-the-house clothes, but slacks and a button-down, the kind of effort he makes for things that matter to him. He had a folder on the kitchen table, and he put it in a canvas bag when I came in. He didn't explain. We drove to an office building on the south side of the city, a 2-story brick building with a small parking lot and a directory by the entrance. Daniel Marsh, estate and probate attorney. Suite 104. I had never been here before, but I knew the name. My father went in. I waited. I sat in a row of padded chairs in the waiting room, and I did not look at my phone, and I did not read any of the magazines on the table beside me. I just sat. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s who clearly knew my father by sight, offered me coffee and I said yes, and then I held the cup without drinking it for most of the 47 minutes I waited. My father came out at 5 minutes past 10. He looked different. Not lighter, exactly, that is not quite the right word for it. But there was something settled about him. The way a person looks when they have finally done the thing they should have done a year ago and they know it. In the parking lot, before he got into the car, he stopped. He reached into the canvas bag and took out a sealed envelope. My name, Claire, was written on the front in his handwriting. He held it out to me. "Don't open this yet, asterisk," he said. Asterisk, "I'll tell you when. Just keep it." I took it. I put it in the inside pocket of my coat, where I keep my phone. I felt its weight against my ribs. "Okay, asterisk," I said. Asterisk, "Are you going to tell me what's inside?" He almost smiled. "You'll know when you need to." We drove home. I made him lunch. He sat at the kitchen table, and we talked about something completely ordinary, the oak trees in the backyard, whether the one on the far left was getting enough light. He seemed comfortable. Easy. I stayed until early afternoon and then went home, intending to come back the next morning as usual. At 3:47 that afternoon, he called me. His voice was different, not frightened, but careful, the voice he used when he was in pain and was choosing not to make it obvious. He said he'd been having some chest tightness since just afternoon. He had thought it would pass. It hadn't. I told him to call 911. He said he would. I was in my car in less than 4 minutes. By the time I reached his street, the ambulance was already there. He was admitted to St. Vincent's. The cardiologist on call that evening described it as a significant cardiac event, not the worst possible outcome, she was careful to say, but serious enough. He would need to stay for monitoring. There would be tests. There would be decisions to make. I called Marcus from the waiting room. He was on a flight in less than 2 hours. I noted that. I thought about how long it had taken him to get to my father's 60th birthday. The first 2 days at St. Vincent's, Marcus and I moved around each other like we always had, functionally, carefully, without warmth or open conflict. He asked the nurses questions. He spoke with the attending physician, introduced himself as Gerald's son, used the full weight of his confidence in a way that I recognized as both genuine concern and performance. He knew how to take up space in professional settings. He always had. He asked me twice, in the first day and a half, whether I had spoken to Daniel Marsh. I said no both times. Something shifted in him when I said it. A small relaxation. A settling. I watched it happen and I filed it away. I took the night shifts. Not because anyone asked me to, Marcus offered, with the kind of offer that expects to be declined, and I declined it. I sat in the chair beside my father's bed through the quiet hours. Sometimes he slept. Sometimes he was awake and we talked, or didn't talk, or I just sat there while he looked at the ceiling. At 2 a.m. on the second night, he reached over and put his hand on mine and said, "You have the envelope?" I touched my coat pocket. "I have it." He nodded. He closed his eyes again. On the third day, a Tuesday, which felt like a coincidence that wasn't, I arrived at the hospital at 4:30. I had stopped for coffee, which I do when I am bracing for something I can't name. I walked down the corridor of the 4th floor, and I paused outside room 412. Through the window in the door, I could see Marcus. He was in the chair on the far side of my father's bed, leaning forward the way he did, elbows on his knees. My father was propped up against pillows, eyes half closed. The afternoon medication had made him drowsy. Marcus was talking. He had been talking for a while, I could tell. There was a rhythm to it, a build-up, the particular cadence of a man who has been making a case and is nearing his conclusion. I stood there for a moment. I heard it clearly through the gap at the bottom of the door. And honestly, Dad, Claire has never once made this family easier. You know that. She's a burden. She always has been. She's built her whole life around being here, and now she thinks that entitles her to. I pushed open the door. Marcus looked up, startled. He stopped speaking mid-sentence, which is the one thing he rarely does. He looked at my face. I don't know what was on it. I know what was not on it: surprise, hurt, or any desire to respond. I crossed the room. I sat down in the chair on the other side of my father's bed. I took my father's hand. Gerald Harmon opened his eyes. He looked at me, and then, slowly, he looked at Marcus. Marcus recovered quickly. He cleared his throat. He pivoted. I was just telling Dad that we need to start thinking practically about what comes next. The house, the care situation. My father said nothing. He was still looking at Marcus with the same steady, slightly tired expression I had seen at that Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago, the one that said, "I hear what you're saying and I am forming an opinion about it." Marcus continued. He talked about the practical realities of long-term care, about costs, about the house being an underutilized asset, about making decisions now so that no one had to make them under pressure later. He talked for several minutes. He was coherent and he was organized and he was, in the way he always was, persuasive. I held my father's hand and I watched his face. Not Marcus's face. My father's. There is something that happens in the face of someone who has already made a decision when they are being pressured to make a different one. A very slight, very particular stillness. Not anger, something older than anger. Something that has considered the argument and found it insufficient. After a while, in the middle of one of Marcus's sentences, my father said, "That's enough." He said it quietly. No anger. No emphasis. Just a statement of fact. Marcus stopped. My father turned his head to look at me. His eyes were clearer now than they had been when I'd walked in. "Did you keep it?" he asked. I touched my coat pocket. "Yes." He held my gaze for a moment. Something passed between us, not a secret exactly, but something in the register of secrets. An acknowledgement. "Good," he said. He closed his eyes. Marcus looked between us. I watched his face. I watched him begin to understand that there was something he didn't know about, that it had already happened, that it was not something he could undo. I didn't explain. I just stayed. I left the hospital that night with the envelope still sealed. I wasn't ready to read it, but I understood what it meant. And so, slowly, did Marcus. My father was at St. Vincent's for 11 days. He was discharged on a cold morning, and I brought him home to the house on the tree-lined street, and I helped him settle back in, and I restocked his kitchen and made sure his prescriptions were filled and sat with him for a while before I went home. Marcus flew back east 2 days after my father's discharge. He called once while he was still in Ohio, after my father was home, a short call, functional. He asked how Gerald was. I told him. There was a silence at the end of the call that neither of us filled. In the 3 weeks after, he called me twice. Both times, the calls were shorter than usual. I still had not opened the envelope. I don't know exactly why I waited. Some part of me understood that opening it was a kind of finality, that once I knew what was inside it, a certain period of waiting would be over, and something else would begin. I wasn't ready to rush that. My father had said when you need to, and I did not yet need to. Then Daniel Marsh called. It was a Thursday evening, just after 7. He introduced himself, though I already knew who he was, and he asked if I had read the letter my father had left with me. I said no. He said that there would be a formal meeting in the next few weeks, a reading of the estate documents, and that it might help me to read the letter beforehand. He said it gently, the way someone speaks when they want to prepare you without alarming you. I thanked him. I hung up. I went in my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I took the envelope out of the drawer where I had been keeping it, and I held it for a moment. Then I opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on the same notepad my father kept by his kitchen phone. His handwriting, that careful, angular print, looked no different than it always had. He had not rushed it. I will not read you every word. Some of it is too private, even now, even here. But I will tell you what mattered. He wrote that he had known, for some time, what Marcus was doing. He was not angry about it, he wrote. That was one of the first things he said. He understood Marcus. He had always understood Marcus, probably better than Marcus understood himself. He wrote that a man who measures his worth by what he might inherit is a man who has not yet found his own ground, and that he was sorry he had not found a way to say that to Marcus directly. He wrote about my mother. About the years after she died. About the way I had remained, not because I was asked to, not because I didn't have other options, but because I had decided that proximity was its own kind of love. He wrote that he had watched me for 2 years after his diagnosis reorganize my life around his without making it a sacrifice, without treating it as a thing that owed me anything. He said, I see what you have done. I want you to know that I see it. He wrote that he had changed the will. He was precise about this, as he was precise about everything. He explained what he had done and why, and he said he did not want me to be surprised by anything at the formal reading. He said Daniel Marsh would walk me through the details. And then, at the end of the last page, in slightly larger letters than the rest, he wrote, You stayed. That matters more than anything in the will. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases, and I put it back in the envelope. I sat there for a while in the quiet of my bedroom. I was not crying exactly. But there is a feeling that is adjacent to crying, a kind of release that doesn't need tears, and I had that. I had it for a long time. The formal reading was 3.5 weeks after my father's discharge. A Thursday morning in December, Daniel Marsh's office, the same building where I had waited in the padded chairs with an untouched cup of coffee. The 3 of us, my father, Marcus, and I, sat in chairs arranged in a loose arc across from Daniel's desk. My father was in the center. He looked comfortable. He had dressed carefully again, the same slacks and button-down. Daniel read the document clearly and without editorializing, the way estate attorneys do. My father had left the house to me, the investments to me, the small life insurance policy to me. There was a specific, named amount for Marcus, not nothing, but a fraction of what my father's estate was worth. And a single line, written by my father into the document itself, that Daniel read in the same measured voice as everything else. My son is capable. He does not need this. Marcus's jaw tightened. It was the only visible movement. When Daniel finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to have its own weight. Then Marcus said, He didn't tell me. His voice was flat. Not outraged. Not even surprised, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something almost resigned. I looked at him. No, I said. He told me. I didn't say it to wound him. I said it because it was true. Because it was the simplest possible statement of what had happened, and my father had always believed that the simplest possible statement was usually the right one. Marcus did not contest the will. Daniel had told me, privately, that the documentation was thorough in the way that only happens when an attorney has anticipated a challenge and prepared for it. My father had thought things through. He had measured twice. Marcus and I did not speak for 4 months after the reading. The silence was not dramatic. There was no final confrontation, no door slammed, no letter written. There was just the absence of phone calls, and eventually I stopped checking for them. When he did call, in the spring, it was about logistics, a question about the house, about the timing of something practical. We were civil. We were always civil. Some things between siblings who are not close are held together by civility alone, and ours was one of them. I sold the house. I want to tell you about this decision because I think it is the part that might surprise you. People often assume, in stories like this one, that the house is the prize, that keeping it is the point, that possession is the vindication. But my father's house was never about possession to me. It was about him. About the years I had spent in it with him, the Tuesday mornings and the kitchen table and the oak trees in the backyard. Those things do not live in the structure. They live somewhere else. I sold the house, and with part of the proceeds I bought myself a place of my own for the first time in my adult life, a small house 10 minutes from my father's new apartment, which is what he chose when he was ready to move, something easier to manage. I have a back porch there too. It faces east. I sit on it on weekend mornings when the light is good. The rest of the money from my father's estate went into an account I set up in my own name. Not a trust, not a joint account, not something contingent on anyone else. Mine. The first time I logged into it and saw the balance and thought, this is mine, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not triumph. Not relief. Just a kind of solidity. The feeling of standing on ground that doesn't shift. My father is still alive. He is 72 years old, and he is slower than he was, and some days are harder than others, but he is present and he is himself, which is the only thing I ever really wanted for him. We have dinner together on Sundays. He comes to my house now, or I go to his apartment, and we sit and we eat and we talk about the things we have always talked about, small, specific things. The weather. Books. What's growing in the yard. Every Tuesday morning, I drive him to his appointment at the neurology clinic. I know his cardiologist's name and his neurologist's name and the name of the woman at the pharmacy. His coffee is weaker than it used to be, but he still drinks it. One Sunday afternoon, a few months after the will reading, he asked me if I had heard from Marcus. I said yes. A little. He nodded. He didn't ask more. He looked out the window for a moment, and then he said, some things find their way. Some don't. I did what I could. I thought, you did everything. I still have the letter. I keep it in a cedar box on my dresser, the same box my mother used for small things, buttons and ribbon, and the kind of clutter that doesn't have a better home. The letter is in there now, in its original envelope, folded along the same creases. I don't take it out often. I don't need to. I know what it says. But there is something about knowing it is there, that 3 pages of my father's handwriting exist in the world, in his careful angular print, saying, I see what you have done. I see it, that is different from any other thing I own. It is different from the house proceeds and the account in my name and the porch that faces east. It is the thing I would take first if there were ever a fire. My brother called me a burden at my father's bedside. My father had already decided, that same morning, exactly what I was worth to him. He put it in writing. He gave it to me to keep. And I kept it. If you have sat quietly in a room while someone said something about you that wasn't true, if you have held your ground without explaining yourself, and waited for the truth to show up in its own time, then I think you understand something about this story that doesn't need to be explained. Thank you for sitting with me. Drop a comment and tell me what stayed with you, or share this with someone who might need to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.